Hello everyone and welcome to another Elemental Shaman video guide. In this guide we're going to be going over everything that you need to know about the notorious gambling build for patch 7.3 and patch 7.3.5. This build has been surfacing a lot more and more often in the Elemental Shaman scene, and there's going to be a lot to talk about in this video guide. So, without further ado, let's get right into it.
Damn straight.
So what exactly is the gamble build and how does it work? The gamble build focuses on a constant flow of Maelstrom and specific procs in order to deal the most damage the class can muster. The name of the build stems from its unique playstyle and RNG bound setup that looks and feels like you're playing the slots machines at a casino. The build relies on specific key ingredients in order to function at its highest throughput and quality. This key ingredients list will start with the legendary pairing between the legendary gloves, the Smoldering Heart, and the legendary boots, the Deceiver's Blood Pact. The legendary gloves gives us a small percent chance, increasing with Maelstrom spent, to go into Ascendance for 10 seconds. Ascendance is a great time for us because we're dealing a crap ton of damage, so we want to be going into Ascendance as often as possible. The pairing between the gloves and the boots, the Deceiver's Blood Pact, which gives us a 20% chance, flat rate, to refund all the Maelstrom spent on our Earth Shocks, giving us another chance to go into Ascendance through the gloves, which is phenomenal. So you can already see that the synergy between these two items is really, really great, and that's why it's called the gamble build. It's all about RNG, it's all about procs, it's all about trying to get these procs to do all the damage, right? So let's move on to the next item on our list. The tier 24-piece set equipped, the Skybreaker set. Now, this set in particularly synergizes extremely well with the gamble build. The gamble build does work with other tier sets. It can work on its own without a tier set, but this tier set in particular scales and does a great amount of synergy with the build itself. Let's talk about what it does. Our 2 set reduces the cooldown of our Storm or Fire Elemental, based on whichever one we're using, by 2 or 3 seconds when our Flame Shock periodic damage deals a critical strike. Keep in mind though that this effect can only occur once every 1 second. So every time our Flame Shock crits, the remaining time of our next Fire or Storm Elemental is reduced, giving us more damage more often. The 4 set, however, when our Storm Elemental or Fire Elemental is active, the periodic damage of our Flame Shock deals 40% increased damage and always critical strikes. So we're guaranteed to reduce the cooldown of our next Storm or Fire Elemental while the current one is active, guaranteed, right? And it's dealing 40% increased damage. So this has a lot of potential to do incredible amounts of damage if we're multi-dotting or even if we're on just single target. When our Storm Elemental is active, however, we are gaining Maelstrom periodically because it gives us 10 Maelstrom every time it does its basic attack. More Maelstrom equals more Earth Shocks, which equals more procs of Ascendance, right? So you can see the synergy between the tier 20 set and the gamble build itself. Let's talk about specific talents usage here. We're going to go over some specific talents that are suggested for this build and pretty much will not work without it. Like, the gamble build won't work without a specific talent in this list, but the other talents that we're going to be talking about just go the best out of its tier with this build. The first one we're talking about is the Totem Mastery talent. Our tier 15 talent trees, we don't really have a lot of utility in here, but the Totem Mastery is really, really great with this build as it offers some unique buffs to us that are paramount. Let's go over these buffs. So our Flame Shock damage over time is increased by a percentage. That's one of the buffs. We get increased haste. We get another flat chance or a percentage chance to cause elemental overload with our Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning. So more elemental overloads equals more Maelstrom, right? So we're trying to gain as much Maelstrom here, as well as a flat Maelstrom gain every second. So we get 1 Maelstrom every second, more Maelstrom, more Earth Shocks, more Ascendance. So the Totem Mastery out of the 3 is really, really great. Another this is pretty much one of the bread and butter key ingredients to the build itself is Aftershock talent. The Aftershock talent is one of the most important segments of this build. You cannot play the build without it, as it offers some unique playstyle into this build, and we'll talk about it. So Aftershock, the effect of it, gives us 30% of the Maelstrom spent on any ability back. So it refunds it, right? If you think about the pairing between the Aftershock and the Legendary Boots gives us a 20% chance to refund all the Maelstrom spent on our Earthshock. Aftershock refunds 30% of the Maelstrom spent. This makes Earthshock a Maelstrom generator if the boots proc. We're going to be talking about when to use Earthshock later, but you can do the math yourself. If you used Earthshock at 80 Maelstrom and then your boots procced, you got 80 Maelstrom back, but then you got an additional 30% of that 80 Maelstrom that you spent back thanks to Aftershock, making your next Earthshock more powerful, right? So you can see the synergy already between this. More Maelstrom spent on your Earthshock equals a higher percent chance to proc Ascendance from your gloves. So Aftershock is essential. Another talent that we're talking about here is Ascendance. Ascendance is pretty much what we want to go into all the time. So you're going to be running this talent in the gamble build 100% of the time. But that could be subject to change. You could be running specifically Lightning Rod for this build because of a personal preference, but it is highly recommended that you run Ascendance because that is the name of the game. We want to be in Ascendance as often as possible. Having an Ascendance cooldown, bringing us into Ascendance 15 seconds longer in a fight every 3 minutes it's go-to. So we've talked about talents, we've talked about tier 20, we've talked about legendaries. Let's talk about stats. Stats are another key ingredient, obviously, in the build and how it's going to work. Our stat weights are leaning towards a haste powered build with more focus on casting more spells faster. The more haste you get, keep in mind though that the more your other stats are going to start to weigh more. But your stat weight should look like haste and then crit and then far above mastery and versatility. So to give you an idea, for every X amount of haste, you want 0.92 X amount of crit, and then from that you want maybe 0.20% of mastery and 0.20% of versatility for every X amount of haste. Keep in mind though, like I said before, that the more haste you get, the more your other stats start to weigh more. So I've noticed that this value starts to come up at around 35-36% haste. That's what I've noticed in my personal character. Once I hit that amount, then crit starts to weigh more than haste, but not more than versatility or mastery. Mastery and versatility does not even come close to haste still, but crit does start to weigh more when you get to higher amounts. So keep that in mind. So now that we've talked about the key ingredients to the build, let's move on to the next section. Now that we've talked about key ingredients, we can go over talent compositions for the gamble build. It is still suggested though that you go with talents such as Totem Mastery, Aftershock, and Ascendance, as these talents will generally outperform the other ones on their tier when it comes to the gamble build. Secondary talents are generally up to the user, as Elemental Blast or Primal Elementalist can be switched out. Storm Elemental and Echo the Elements can also be switched out. It's pretty much just dependent on how you see fit your talents and how you want your playstyle to be. On the Warcraft logs and the forums though, there are talent compositions that have been outperforming the other ones, such as the standard build, which is the Fire Elemental Primal Elementalist coupled with the Echo of the Elements, or the Primal Elementalist and Storm Elemental talents, which would be the Storm Elemental gamble build talent composition. There are other variations before, as I said. You can go with whichever ones out of those two talent tiers that you see fit. It's all dependent on your playstyle, but I'm just letting you guys know now that out of all of them, the Storm Elemental and regular Primal Elementalist, Fire Elemental with Echo of the Elements talent builds are the ones that are outperforming and on top right now. In this section, we're going to be going over the points of flow and the flow of battle. Now, I say these because I want you guys to have just a little bit of a better understanding of how the gamble build works and how it all comes together into one magnificent RNG bound bullshit of ball of lava, right? So in this points of flow section, we're going to be talking about how the standard gamble build comes together and how the storm elemental gamble build, which is my personal favorite, also comes together. There's going to be 3 points of interaction with the standard gamble build. The first point is our Maelstrom generation, right? So we generate Maelstrom through our normal spells like Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolts, Lava Burst, and also other outside means like if we're using Totem Mastery, which is suggested, the passive Maelstrom generation. So we're generating Maelstrom all the time, right? That goes into Earthshock utilization. In this point, we want to be capitalizing on our Earthshock use, keeping an eye on our procs from our Deceiver's Blood Pack legendaries, and make sure that we're using Earthshock appropriately and optimally, right? After this, we want to be going into Ascendance uptime. So Maelstrom generation goes into Earthshock utilization, then into Ascendance uptime, and the cycle repeats. Ascendance uptime, like I said before, is generally the point in battle of which we are dealing a crap ton of damage while we're in Ascendance. We're spamming Lava Bursts, we're trying to get out as much Lava Burst as possible while still Earthshocking at max Maelstrom or at a degree of Maelstrom that is utilized, right? So this flow still continues while we're in Ascendance. It doesn't reset, it doesn't, right? The flow of the standard gamble build is pretty simple. Generation of Maelstrom, Earthshock utilization, Ascendance uptime, repeat. The second point is Storm Elemental gamble build, right? So in this variation of the flow of battle, it's very similar to the first, but we add in a Storm Elemental uptime. So we go from Maelstrom generation, right, to Earthshock utilization, to Ascendance uptime, to Storm Elemental uptime. And I'll tell you why this is in here, because Storm Elemental brings us Maelstrom generation. The Storm Elemental gamble build is my personal favorite because the playstyle with the Storm Elemental is pretty fast-paced, pretty intense, and it's a hell of a lot of fun. We're going to be going over some key points here as to why Storm Elemental is also in this little flow chart that I made. So Maelstrom generation, we're going to start at ground zero. Storm Elemental, taking a step back, generates passive Maelstrom every time it casts its basic ability, Gust of Wind or Wind Gust, whatever it's called, right? Generates 10 Maelstrom every time it casts that ability. This goes into our Maelstrom generation point, then Earthshock utilization. More Maelstrom equals more Earthshocks equals more Ascendance uptime. But another thing that we're going to include in here is our artifact trait, Elementalist. Elementalist works, it's a passive ability. Every time we cast Lava Burst, the remaining cooldown of our Fire or Storm Elemental is reduced by 2 seconds. More Lava Bursts equals more uptime on our Storm Elemental equals more Earthshock utilization and Maelstrom generation, right? So you can see the intense synergy here that even goes back to our tier 22 set or tier 22 and 4 set, right? The Skybreaker set, right? More uptime on our Storm Elemental, more Flame Shock damage. It's a cycle of intense synergy, and it comes together fantastically. So now that we've talked about the points of flow, let's talk about the flow of battle. The gamble build brings a slight variation into your standard shaman rotation. It's best to use your Earthshock at roughly 70 to 75 Maelstrom while out of Ascendance, and the normal 110 to 117 value of Maelstrom while in Ascendance, right? The value of Maelstrom has been proven, so 70 to 75, this value of Maelstrom has been proven to be the most optimal value of Maelstrom to spend in conjunction with the proc percentage of Ascendance and without sacrificing any DPS. So you want to be using your Earth Shocks at roughly 70 to 75 Maelstrom while you're out of Ascendance. Aftershock coupled with the Lego boots, like I said before, also brings some flavor into your rotation, making Earthshock a Maelstrom generator. Maelstrom generator. We've talked about this a little bit before, but 70 to 75 Maelstrom is also a safe zone because if you use your Earthshock at 110 to 117 and then your boots proc, like the 20% refund on your Earthshock, if that procs, but also Aftershock gives you a 30% of the Maelstrom refunded, so 30% of 100 is already 30 Maelstrom. So you're overcapping your Maelstrom, and that's not good. You're wasting Maelstrom pretty much. Alright, now we're going to be talking about what your opening rotation and normal rotation are going to be looking like with the Gamble build. Starting combat at around 4.5 seconds before the pull, you're going to be putting down your Totem Mastery totems, and then pre-potting with Potion of Prolonged Power at around 3 seconds. At 2 seconds, you're going to be pre-casting your Lightning Bolt before the pull, and then into your Fire Elemental or Storm Elemental, depending on which talent you choose. And if you're going to be Bloodlusting at the start, this is the point after your cast of your Elemental is where you Bloodlust. After that, you're going to apply your Flame Shock. This will automatically crit thanks to your tier 24 piece. If you have it, the first Flame Shock will automatically crit, granting you your 2 stack of the Elemental Focus buff. If your precast of the Lightning Bolt crit, then your first Flame Shock will have that buff already on it, so you will be benefiting from that, and you may not have to refresh it. Refresh the Flame Shock, that is. Casting your Lava Burst comes in next. If you have the talent Echo of the Elements, you will be casting both charges here and then going into a refresh of your Flame Shock if your first cast of Flame Shock did not have the Elemental Focus buff. After that, we're going to be going into Ascendance and spamming Lava Burst over and over and over again until we reach around 110 to 117 Maelstrom. This is where we Earth Shock. Passive Maelstrom will be gained from Storm Elemental, so definitely keep an eye on your Maelstrom gains and make sure not to overload on your Maelstrom and just waste Maelstrom here. This is very essential. After we come out of Ascendance, keep in mind though that we're spamming Earth Shocks as much as we can, and we're putting out those Lava Bursts over and over and over again and spending our Maelstrom on Earth Shocks at the right times. After we come out of Ascendance, we're going to be using Stormkeeper, and we will most likely be benefiting from a Power of the Maelstrom buff. The Power of the Maelstrom gives us an additional overload, 100% chance that our Lightning Bolt will overload. So this coupled with Stormkeeper is a lot of damage. After we cast our Stormkeeper here, and we're hoping for that Power of the Maelstrom buff, which we're most likely going to be having because we've been spamming Lava Burst back to back, we're going to be casting those 3 charges of Lightning Bolt, still keeping an eye on our Maelstrom and using Earth Shock when necessary at around 70 because we're out of Ascendance. We're going to be still using Earth Shock, but around 70 to 75 Maelstrom, and then we're going to continue with our normal rotation. Our normal rotation is pretty much just a spell priority. We're going to be applying Flame Shock if it's absent on the target, or if it will expire in 9 seconds or less, and our Maelstrom is 20 or higher, and we have a stack of Elemental Focus available to put onto, or like put into that Flame Shock that's going on the target, so that it will deal 10% increased damage. After that, our priority is to keep Totem Mastery down if it's absent or if we're out of range, or if it will expire in the next 3 seconds. That's when we want to put totems down. After that, if we're talented into Elemental Blast, this is where it becomes next on priority. So we want to be keeping Elemental Blast on cooldown if we're talented into it. And then also after that, be sure that you are Earth Shocking at 70 to 75 Maelstrom. This value changes depending on if you're in Ascendance or not. This goes up to 110 to 117. So keep note of that and make an adjustment where necessary. After that, if we have a Power of the Maelstrom buff and Stormkeeper is active, we want to get rid of those stacks of Lightning Bolt. So if we have Stormkeeper up, we're going to use that in our normal rotation, as well as if Power of the Maelstrom is active, get those out right away. After that, Lava Burst comes priority if it is effective from a Lava Surge proc. So if it's an instant cast Lava Burst, that comes next on the priority of list. Number 7, we want to be casting Stormkeeper if it's available and if we can spend all 3 charges before the buff expires. A situation where this may happen is if you cast Stormkeeper to gain instant cast Lightning Bolts and you generate Maelstrom, but then you Earthshock and then you're in Ascendance. You actually have to stop casting those Lightning Bolts and while you're in Ascendance and cast Lava Burst as much as you can. If your timer runs out on your Stormkeeper, that's a no-go. So you have to be very wary with this kind of example of a situation. After that, number 8 is casting Lava Burst on cooldown, and 9 is casting Lightning Bolt as a filler spell. So casting Lava Burst and Lightning Bolt as filler spells at the end of the priority of spells here. Now we've gone over what our opening rotation and our normal rotation look like, or in theory, what they should be. I'm going to give you guys a little video about how your opening rotation should look like when you're using the Storm Elemental talent composition.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Alright guys, this concludes my video for the Elemental Shaman Gamble Guide. I hope you all enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making it. Like it if you like it, subscribe if you want more Elemental Shaman content, as well as don't forget to follow me on my Instagram and Twitter, my social medias. The links to those will be in the description down below. If you want to catch me on my live stream at twitch.tv/Barokoshama, you can drop a follow there or even sub to the channel. If you want to support the channel even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Barokoshama. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, keep calm and Maelstrom on.